My dear friends, it's great to see you. I'm Stephen Clements, a writer, a gamer, and an appreciator of big brain activities in general. On this channel, I perform dramatic story readings, I provide role-playing game and movie reviews, and I get to talk to interesting people. And in this episode, we're continuing our discussion through text with the late great D&D creator Gary Gygax by examining his thoughts in the book Role-Playing Mastery. We're up to chapter 7 this time, so if you haven't seen the previous 6 chapters plus preface, go check them out. But each topic is fairly self-contained, so if this is the first time you've heard it, jump right in. And so what we're going to do in this review is I'm going to read to you the text, as written by Mr. Gygax, and at the end offer my own thoughts about what he had to say, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And I find that this book is a good jumping off point for discussions about the philosophy of gaming with your friends and with strangers online. So feel free to share this around and get their thoughts and opinions on it as well. And without further ado, Chapter 7, Tactical Mastery. Knowing the game system and its specific rules gives the master player insight into the strategy of the game. This knowledge also allows the player to devise a grand tactical plan for the success and advancement of his character. Strategy and grand tactics vary from game to game, of course. In fact, there is even greater variance in tactical play. As games differ, and player PC approaches differ, so too does each and every scenario played. If the same scenario, in text form, is presented to 2 identical groups of PCs, the fact remains that the players behind those PCs will be different and will have their own singular approaches to the problems and challenges posed by the scenario. One approach is not necessarily better or worse than the other. All that can be said is that they are different, and the methods that each group of players use might indeed both lead to success. Not only do scenarios differ when they're played from group to group, but even the most popular of these published game aids has only limited acceptance. Perhaps 25% of the audience of a given RPG will serve as GM or player in a scenario of outstanding repute. The others pass by one published scenario in favor of another, or make up their own. How then can one attain tactical mastery? Experience is the best teacher, a cliche to be sure, but a cliche precisely because it is true. There is also a truism that applies particularly with regard to becoming a master tactician of role-playing games. You know yourself and what you do better than I or anyone else ever could. No one can speak in general terms of tactical expertise. The game you play is specific, has its own rules, and is certainly unique. Each game campaign, each scenario within the campaign is different, and so too are the tactics that apply. Within each game's rules are provided, implicitly or explicitly, varying approaches to play. For instance, whether PCs are defined by classes or by skills, this variation is a specific aspect that must be considered when trying to define proper tactics. The multiplicity of games, possible campaigns, and possible scenarios is compounded by the fact that any RPG activity is engaged in by a group of players and PCs. Characters within a given PC group are unique. Variables such as the number of PCs in a group, each character's attributes, and the class or skills attached to each PC make it a virtual impossibility to treat tactics on a specific level. Describing how to succeed at a role-playing game on the tactical level is much like trying to describe the best route to take when driving from Los Angeles to New York without knowing what type of vehicle is being used, how much fuel the vehicle consumes, what time of year it is, or any other fundamental facts that bear critically upon the definition of best in any certain case. If assumptions as to the game, number of PCs, classes, skills, and the scenario to be played are made, then a discussion of tactics applicable to that set of known quantities is possible. The problem is, unless many major game systems are dealt with in this fashion, and there are a wide number of hypothetical PC groups placed within a broad sampling of scenarios designed for each of the games treated, the lessons learned from the exercise will be of little use. Even given such an extensive treatment, most readers would find that at best, only a fraction of the material presented will be of any use to them. Simply put, role-playing games are too scenario-specific themselves to make even a treatise pertinent to a single game system of use to anyone except a novice. Only the most general material, then, can apply to all players in all major game systems. Given this, can a vague treatment of tactics be considered useful? Yes. Consider this. A specific treatment of the tactical skills of play would have to be specific as to game, characters, and scenario, just as was described. Worse still, the scenario-specific advice would have to deal with information and data that would never be known to the players until after completion of the scenario, if even then. Instead of taking this approach, the advice here will generalize as to masterful tactics, but then we will narrow the focus somewhat and do something that will be more specific but still generally applicable. There are tactical actions that any PC can follow in any game and scenario that will help assure success. These are described on the following pages. Once these have been covered, we will discuss how a scenario is constructed. This specific general knowledge will enable the serious player to become a master of the tactics of his chosen RPG system, providing he assiduously applies his knowledge in a thoughtful and reasoned way. Tactical mastery tips. Know the mission. Based on the information you're given in the background and setting of a scenario, define exactly what you're going to try to do. Sometimes the mission will be spelled out in no uncertain terms. If it is not, you should be able to deduce it logically from the information provided. Keep the mission in mind at all times so that each activity you engage in assists in the overall aim. Know the goal. The mission should have a set goal. When that goal is successfully achieved or arrived at, the mission is complete and the adventure should conclude at that point. The distinction between mission and goal may not always seem clear-cut, but the distinction is there nonetheless. The mission is a description of what must be done to achieve success. The goal is an enumeration of the conditions that will prevail when the mission is complete. For instance, the mission of a lawman is to apprehend and detain a suspected criminal. The goal of that mission is attained when the quarry is safely behind bars. Define the objectives. The mission and goal, once defined and analyzed, will contain distinct places where progress can be measured. Each such objective should take you one step closer to attainment of the goal and completion of the mission. At times, however, the reaching of an objective does not lead directly toward the next objective. After reaching an objective, examine your remaining resources. If you have incurred losses so great as to make further objectives probably unattainable, then break off the mission for the time being. Run away that day, re-equip, and return to the mission when you are back at full strength. In our example, one of the lawman's first objectives would be to find the trail of the criminal he is seeking. Then he must catch up with and force an encounter with his quarry, and so forth. Make and follow a plan. When the mission is understood, the goal is clear to all, and objectives have been set, then it is time to devise a plan that takes into account all members of the PC group and how they will communicate and operate together. Have each team member understand his assignment, assess strengths and weaknesses, know all the resources available. The plan is to be adhered to at all times when it appears to have a chance of success or less chance of failure than some other plan. In the plan should be recognition signals, a rendezvous point in case the team should become separated, and even some cover story to explain your presence activity in the area where the scenario takes place. Maintain the tempo. Keep moving. Press toward the goal. Time is often the ally of the opponent, so allow as little as possible to be wasted. Operate as a unit. The characters involved in an adventure must cooperate to achieve their goal and successfully complete the mission. Utilize each character's strength and cover everyone's weaknesses as a group entity. Separated, fingers are vulnerable. In a tightly closed form, they become a fist. Use your sense. Use your common sense at all times. Usually, it will be the best method for average problem solving. And your character's senses. Your character has them. Use them. How? You have to stay in constant contact with the GM in this regard. When your PC is in any situation in which information is lacking, entering an unknown area, for example, address the GM and assume a mode such as this. I'm looking up, down, and all around. What do I see? Can I hear anything? What do I smell? Do I sense or feel something unusual? Record, refer, and remember. Keep track of your resources. This means weapons, devices, and anything else useful. Team members are resources too, of course, but that utilization has already been dealt with. Use this information as reference material when you're trying to determine a course of action. Additionally, record information as to where you've been, where you are now, and where you're going. Note anything unusual in this regard. When actual record keeping would be cumbersome or time-consuming, make a conscious effort to remember what you have come across so that you will recognize it if you see it again. Scout the enemy. Take the time and make the effort to get to know your opponents as fully as possible. This knowledge will enable the most efficient handling of such opposition with a minimum expenditure of time and other resources in overcoming whatever stands between you and your goal. In the example used earlier, the lawman's search for the criminal will go more quickly if he takes the time to question townspeople and find out that the wrongdoer has a cohort waiting for him in the town to the east. With that one piece of information, the lawman finds out two important things: the criminal's destination and the fact that he, the lawman, will probably have to face 2 opponents instead of just 1 when he arrives at the same place. Be consistent. Strategy and grand tactics will often dictate unique methods of handling familiar problems, because the opponents will be surprised by such methodology. Small-scale tactical applications, on the other hand, call for a high degree of consistency. Think of how one gets through a maze. By placing one hand, let us say to the left, on the wall of a maze, and always keeping it on the wall, one will eventually complete the entire path between entrance and exit. In similar fashion, if you are exploring, take a direction that seems promising and follow it. If you are unable to continue in that direction, have a second choice. Thus, for instance, if one moves always north and west, to return to a place previously passed, one need only move south and east. Evade and avoid. Whenever possible, conserve time and other resources by avoiding unnecessary confrontation. Slip away without fighting, negotiate, or use trickery. The goal of the mission is paramount, and only those activities that will lend probable success to attaining that goal should be undertaken. Don't be afraid to improvise. At times, the plan cannot be followed. Improvise a new set of short-term plans immediately. Again, at times, resources will not be sufficient to complete the mission. Improvise! Perhaps materials and/or friendly individuals at hand can be utilized. When you are improvising, keep your goal and objectives in mind. In our example of the lawman and the criminal, let us suppose that the lawman arrives at the town and finds the cohort, without revealing his own true identity, of course, but discovers that the man he's after is nowhere to be seen. Was the lawman's original information incorrect? Has he somehow arrived at the destination before his quarry got there? Should he bide his time or resume his search in a different locale? The lawman must improvise because things haven't gone the way he expected them to, but no matter what he decides to do at this juncture, he should always keep sight of his mission and his goal. There are other such tactical bits that could be dealt with if we broke things down to very specific generalities, but the foregoing actually embody the truly important tactics that need to be remembered and followed to gain tactical mastery. You identify your mission, set your goal, determine your objectives, get to know the enemy, and plan with your team. You use every sense and resource to move swiftly from objective to objective in order to attain your goal. You are not sidetracked, but you go out of your way to bypass obstacles and enemy strong points whenever possible. You conserve your resources. When you strike, you do so hard and fast, but with only the amount of force necessary to accomplish your aim. There's no sense hitting a fly with a baseball bat after all. If need be, your team will retire in order to re-equip, but you'll be back again. In fact, when you return, you'll know the challenges of the opposition better and will handle them more efficiently. You adventure as lightly equipped as possible for the mission, but each plan calls for different items. Sometimes the retiring and re-equipping is because of a need for changing the plan and using different items to reach your goal. All these tactical definitions, these tips on being successful in operational activity in your chosen role-playing game are well and good. Still, with missions, plans, goals, objectives, and all the rest, you must be wondering about a frame of reference. An overall frame of reference is needed, of course, to completely comprehend the tactical advice. I don't know which RPG you play, neither do I know what particular scenarios you play. In order to form the reference framework needed to bind together the package of tactical tips, we will now consider how a scenario is constructed, and we will place our tactical references within this construction so as to be able to have some specifics that will be applicable for each and every reader. The Disappearing Dwarf. What's in a name? When it comes to RPG scenarios, it can be a lot or a little. I selected the name for our make-believe scenario because it can be applied to 3 genres. Fantasy. The Disappearing Dwarf pertains to a dwarven monarch who vanished before the eyes of his entire court. Science fiction. At the very heart of the galaxy, the Disappearing Dwarf, a red star, has vanished, and with it the main scientific base of the League that was located on the dwarf sun's only planet. Espionage. Vital information was to be passed from agent to agent, but the main figure was the Disappearing Dwarf, who has vanished from the circus. As a player in a campaign, the foregoing is perhaps all you should know about a scenario until you prepare for the actual adventure. Now let's consider what goes into any adventure scenario. A role-playing game scenario presents an adventure, a quest that the PC group will undertake in 1 or more play sessions. There is a current trend toward either the small or large adventure. That is, either the scenario is playable in a single session, or it is on the scale of an epic that will have multiple sessions with many conclusions and then fresh beginnings within the overall saga. Regardless of the size and scope of the scenario, the information within it is divided into 2 distinct portions. The GM is entitled to and must have knowledge of the entire work. A small part of the scenario is written expressly for the PC group. This information is furnished to the players, and through them to the PCs prior to commencement of action and consist of 3 elements: background, current situation, and general information. Background. The play group must have some frame of reference for their activity within the scenario. The who, what, where, when, and why must be told to them. This information is read to the player group by the GM immediately. Let's consider brief treatments of the disappearing dwarf, just as if we were writing a scenario. Fantasy. Fordor Goldenbeard, king of the dwarfs of Grimberg, was one of the wisest and best rulers ever known to his folk. A month ago, in the midst of a festival in his very court, Fordor the king was seated upon his throne before the assemblage 1 minute, then gone the next. An immediate search of the palace was fruitless. No trace of the king could be found. Now, civil war threatens the community of dwarfs as various factions contend for rulership of the kingdom. Science fiction. Doranube 132, a red dwarf sun with a single planet, is missing. It disappeared from space, gone without a trace, a month ago. This is important because its single planet was home to a scientific community whose work centered around secret projects in the League's ongoing war against the alien Yukti invaders. If humans stand any chance, these scientists are the group that would find it. Now they're gone, and the Yukti are on the move. Espionage. The Gesundheit traveling circus has toured Eastern Europe for decades. One of its performers, Otto the Dwarf, was known to your intelligence organization as a key agent in the enemy's espionage apparatus. A month ago, your side was about to kidnap him, for he was known to have information vital to the defense of NATO. Then he suddenly vanished from the circus in the middle of a performance. Enemy agents on the scene are actively searching for Otto, and we can only conclude from this that they themselves did not spirit the dwarf away. The information given here needs to be expanded, of course, for actual play, but this nutshell presentation is sufficient for our purposes. It leads us to current situation. Here the GM reads to the player group the information on who they are, why they have been selected for the mission, what they must do, the amount of time they have to complete their mission, and what must be done if and when they accomplish their goal. Also, some clues will be revealed in this section of the scenario. Because we are covering much ground in a very brief amount of space, we will omit even a precis of the situational material. Clues are indeed needed, though, and they are covered in the section known as General Information. Here are facts that go beyond a straightforward explanation of the background and how the player characters happen to have become involved. Some general information may be common knowledge. That is, anyone who lives in or travels through the scenario area, perhaps including the PCs, could be expected to know these things. Other information may only be known by certain individuals and may only be obtainable by PCs through questioning and investigation. Some of the information may be false or meaningless, especially if the GM is a devious and imaginative sort who has expanded the base of the scenario with some ideas of his own, so that part of the PC's job is to separate the wheat from the chaff, so to speak. Following are descriptions of the general information that could be part of the foundation for each of our sample scenarios. Fantasy. 3 factions in the Dwarven Court vie for power. One group unequivocally supports the vanished king, so the members of that group might be expected to assist the team. The second and third factions are suspects. The second has as its candidate for interim ruler the wife of Fordor Goldenbeard. The third faction supports a cousin of the king. All 3 factions proclaim a deep desire to find Fordor and return him to the throne if at all possible, but it seems likely that at least one faction is lying. The following physical evidence is known. First, a thin circle of black dust appeared and fell to the ground, surrounding the throne. Then the flames of all lights within the cavern chamber flared and instantly burned out just as Fordor vanished. The king's gold cup, which he had been holding when he disappeared, was later found in the king's own bedchamber. Science fiction. The aliens have superior technology, but it seems unlikely that it is so far advanced over that of the League that they could kidnap a sun and planet. Human traders, agents of the aliens, have been uncovered before, and such turncoats might have managed to find their way to Doranub's sole planet. 3 spacecraft were nearby when the disappearance occurred. One was a patrol ship of the League, another was a freighter registered out of Tau Ceti, and the third was a pleasure yacht belonging to a Terran multi-billionaire. Espionage. Otto was a clown and part of the magic act of the circus. Evidently, when the dwarf was made to disappear from a large trunk, he was supposed to end up at the bottom of the slide beneath the center ring, but he never came down the chute. The magician involved was unaware of the dwarf's role as an agent, but you were aware that a stagehand knew about Otto because that man works for your organization. The stagehand is available for questioning. The magician's glamorous assistant is suspected of being an enemy agent. The owner of the circus is an unknown quantity, and the Soviets are rumored to be cautious of him. After the general information and clues are assimilated, the GM then gives the last portion of information available to the group before they ready their characters for actual play in the scenario. This last information tells them how they are to arrive at the scene of the adventure, what special equipment they have, and any other bits of knowledge or information they possess. Now the playgroup knows who they are, who they're working for, and what is asked of them. From this point on, they must interact directly with the GM, asking questions, stating the extent of their actions, and deciding what additional questions and actions are to be taken based on the information given to them by the Game Master. As was stated a few paragraphs ago, each scenario consists of 2 bundles of information. The whole is known to the GM, but only a small portion is initially related to the players. As the team interacts with the adventure scenario, more and more information is gained by the members. Through their choices, they discover more and more. This process is laid out in the body of the scenario. In fact, although it may seem to the players and PCs that they can do anything and everything imaginable, only certain actions are dealt with within the work. Let us consider what other content the scenario has in order to understand this fully. In addition to the background, current situation, and general information given out to the players, the GM also will have maps, charts, or diagrams of the area where the adventure activity will take place. Most, if not all, of this information will be available to the Game Master alone at the commencement of play. Perhaps the players will have incomplete maps or charts, perhaps not. The GM's information, however, will be keyed to describe what facts will be revealed if PCs interact with a certain location or item within the scenario area at a certain time. Suppose, for example, in the fantasy setting, the PCs choose to examine a sample of the black dust which still lies on the floor around the king's throne. The Game Master's information will include a number or letter keyed to the black dust that will correspond to a portion of the scenario text. When the PCs act to examine the stuff, the Game Master will relate the information in that text to the players. This information, in turn, will direct the PCs to one or more other possible areas of action. The same is true for the other game scenarios. The settings differ, but the mechanics are the same. PCs must either follow the clues or else move outside the scope of the scenario. Moving outside the scenario is an important tactical consideration. It is easy to do, and a good GM will handle it so well as to make the player group uncertain of just when they did deviate from the pre-planned course. The Master GM will go one better. He will deliberately include information not found in the scenario as originally presented in published form. A bit of this information may actually be helpful, but the rest is for another purpose altogether. The GM will add it specifically to mislead the players so that they will not follow any of the prescribed routes and go wandering off into a limbo that is unrelated to the adventure, even though the Game Master's expertise makes it all seem very real and part of the whole. Why would a GM do this? Scenarios are limited even if they are of large size. The possibilities are set down on paper. The map, for instance, might have a dozen keyed areas or 100, but that number is still finite and the implicit choices in the scenarios are fairly obvious to a master player. Even if the right choice of clues is carefully hidden and the obstacles to be overcome in order to reach the place where the correct clue can be found are difficult, the limited scope of the scenario is inescapable. Having fun playing is the purpose of the game. As a means to this end, the Master GM extends the horizons to broaden the possibilities for challenge and playing time. Obviously, the scenario contains a little more than the information needed for players to begin, the GM's map, and the information that relates to the keyed areas on the map. That's it. Ancillary information can be added. Special materials not found elsewhere in the game system are common additions, new weapons, items, creatures, and so forth. Also appended might be a roster of characters, pre-created adventurers for use within the scenario. Thus, if for any reason the players do not use characters they themselves have created, play can commence without undue delay by utilization of these specially designed ones. Wait a moment, you're saying. What about the end of the adventure? He just skipped through the scenario without telling us how the whole thing concludes. Right! A masterfully designed scenario will do just that as far as the players are concerned, at least as far as non-master players are concerned anyway. The route will be complex and circular enough to lead them on after they have actually completed their mission. One of the keys will, of course, be the one that should bring the adventure to culmination, a successful conclusion rather than failure, that is. Unless the team is alert, however, they will be led past this in one of two ways typically. One, the GM will make it seem as if there is still some portion of the adventure to be accomplished. Two, the GM will play upon the greed of the team to make them desire additional rewards that seemingly have worth. How does the team of players handle this? They must become master tacticians. Having read this far, you are on your way to becoming such a player. What you must do now is apply the principles and advice that you have read about. At the same time, you have gained vital information in the area of becoming a master GM. You know what a scenario actually contains. By knowing the parts and the purpose of an adventure, you can master, play, or even create one without particular difficulty at this juncture. Practice is needed, naturally, but you have the information. From the foregoing, you can now fully understand the part the Game Master plays in the enactment of a scenario. You can also understand how easily a Master GM can lead unwary players past a logical conclusion and into places they have no business being. Because every reader does not play the same game or the same scenario within the same game system, tactical considerations are hard to nail down with precise examples. The general tactical rules that were stated at the beginning of this chapter obviously apply to the example given of avoiding being led past the goal of the mission. Now that you also understand the basics of scenario construction, the rest of these tactical matters should fall into place without undue difficulty. One other particular tactical consideration needs to be mentioned now, prior to moving back to the scenario examples to apply general principles to specific information. This tactical consideration is possibly the most important one of all. The Game Master affects all aspects of play. Think about that, with emphasis on the word all. The GM furnishes all the information to the player group before and during the playing of the scenario. He can lead, mislead, provoke, tempt, or do just about anything else in the course of each game session. You must be sensitive to the Game Master and listen to what he says. Oh my God, listen to that. Listen to what he says. The GM is human, and that means he is prone to the same shortcomings you have and has strengths similar to yours. Use your real senses to determine his attitude. Use your ears and brain to hear and interpret what the GM tells you. This tactic, coupled with those we have considered already, will assure you tactical mastery of any RPG in time. Time is needed to experiment with tactics and to learn the personality of the individual who is providing the adventure when he serves as Game Master. Even the best poker face and disinterested attitude of the Master GM are insufficient to shield him completely from the player who is master of the game and a master tactician. Bearing that in mind, let's go on to consider a few actual tactical applications. In the science fiction scenario of The Disappearing Dwarf, Doranube 132 and its sole satellite, the planet that housed the scientific hope of the League in its struggle against the alien Yucti, has vanished. Your group of PCs has been brought in because of your marvelous record as heroes and successful minions of mankind. While it might be nice to blast the last aliens forever from the kin of men, or capture the Yucti leaders complete with a mountain of their superior technology, that isn't the reason you were summoned to this region of the galaxy. It is simple to identify your mission. You're to find out what happened to Doranube 132 and its planet and all upon it. Implicit in such a mission would be to recover the lot and bring them back so the scientists could again strive to put the League on equal footing with the Yucti. The minimum goal is to recover the scientists. That's plain also, since the planet itself is not nearly as important as the people who dwelled upon it. The objectives come down to the following based on the information that was given before. 1. Find the 3 spacecraft that were in the area and question the passengers and crew for leads. It is probable that the League patrol ship will be an ally in this endeavor, but that can't be assumed as absolute, for human traders are known to exist in the area, and one or more of the crew members might be just that. 2. From there, an examination of the place where the star and planet once were located is needed to determine if any clues as to what happened might be found there. Special instruments and knowledge previously gained might come into play. 3. From whatever has been gained from 1 and 2, the next objective should become clear. Determining objectives enables the team to set out its plan and begin action accordingly. The remainder of the tactical knowledge is applied, as called for along the way. The information presented by the GM, whether it is drawn from a published scenario or from the Game Master's own creation, is given to enable you to operate within the framework and scope of the adventure. Some portions will be misleading or extraneous. Clear thinking, careful consideration, and tactical ability will cut through such material and find the heart of the matter. This applies as well to science fiction, fantasy, espionage, or any other genre equally. I suggest you use the other examples here, the fantasy and espionage versions of the scenario, to try a bit of tactical work yourself. Take the facts as given and write down the obvious mission. Note the goal, and then put down the objectives that seem probable as steps toward attaining the goal of the mission. That is good practice for the next few adventures you and your team will undertake. A final point needs to be dealt with here, for tactical purposes and for completion of the survey of scenario design. There must be a purpose for the existence of the scenario, some victory point at which the team achieves its actual purpose for being there in the first place. The beginning of a scenario has only a few possible starting places, perhaps only one. Choices become manifold as play progresses, and certain areas of action lead to dead, literally, ends. Unless the scenario is badly designed, however, there will be 2 or more possible conclusions, with one of them describing a partial success. Usually, total success depends on players performing correctly. That is, just because they physically arrive at the right juncture of space and time with their PCs, there is no automatic triumph. Correct thinking and correct actions must be performed in order to succeed. Furthermore, the goal point in the scenario isn't always marked as such. Neither is it always the last area of activity within the whole of the adventure. Because well-designed scenarios will often conceal the fact of having achieved the goal area from players, and a master GM always does so, the players must use their tactical skills to recognize success when it occurs. The goal might be to infiltrate the domain of some terrible opponent, capture some being, gain information, or find some special items. In fact, the scenario might cleverly make the goal seem to include many of these ends. Careful consideration of the preliminary statements in a scenario will surely reveal the main purpose of the adventure. In the SF version of The Disappearing Dwarf, there were several suggestions that could be taken as goals. Deliver a setback to the Yukti aliens, bring in loads of their technology, uncover traitors. Clearly, however, the one reason the adventurers are summoned to the area is to discover what happened to Doranoob 132 and its planet full of scientists. That, and that alone, is the key to success. The other things are frosting on the cake. Why? Well, whatever damage the PCs might inflict on the Yukti, it will be minimal. These aliens are fighting a war in the galaxy and have what must be a huge base of resources. Just as obviously, capture of the Yukti technology would not be particularly useful because all the scientists who could quickly comprehend and utilize the information are gone. Last, discovering who, if any, the traitors were who assisted the aliens in their dastardly deed is rather like locking the barn door after the horse is stolen. Just for the sake of this discussion, let's assume that Doranoob 132 did not disintegrate or actually shift in location. Through some sort of high-technology polarization, it was oriented at a right angle relative to its previous orientation. That is, it is still exactly where it was before, but it can't be seen or detected by normal means. It can be passed through by anything within the galaxy because it is on a different frequency from the objects that still exist in a state of normal polarity. In such a situation, the team would have to discover this fact in order to succeed. With this discovery would probably come information as to how it was done, but a partial victory could be gained even if the group failed to obtain the data pertaining to how the polarization was accomplished. Let us assume that we give an award of 3 points for discovering the fact that the system is polarized, 7 more for the how of the matter, and additional points for discovering other things, 1 for uncovering traitors, 2 for delivering blows to the aliens through destruction of their vehicles and personnel, and 3 for capture of important technology. A perfect score for the scenario would thus total 16 points. This point scoring is not absolute, but is used only as a measure of relative degrees of accomplishment. This doesn't mean that the team must strive for a clean sweep. The theoretical maximum is attainable, but only if circumstances permit. Bad luck, incautious play, and other factors must dictate the final actions of the group. Better to score 10 points, with the PCs finishing the mission alive and well, than to push for a possible 16 in which part or all of the team dies just as the triumph is gained. This is where tactical mastery truly comes into its own. Do what you can, do it as well and efficiently as you can, and never lose sight of the most important RPG goal of all. Enjoyment and fulfillment for you and the continued survival and development of your precious player characters. And that is Chapter 7. Tactical Mastery. Boy howdy. The advice that Gary gives in this one chapter, I wish every player in every game just knew the list. I don't even care if they applied it, but just that they even had the idea to do the basic things he talks about. The number of times I've been in a game session, whether it's a one-shot or whether it's an ongoing campaign, and when you ask the players, so what is it you're here to do again? They don't actually know what the hell they're here to do after you know for a fact you as DM told them that information was given to them. It's pretty unconscionable. Who plays a game where you have no idea what game you're playing? And the quality of the outcomes of those game sessions are usually frustration. Nobody has a good time because some of the people weren't invested in it. That's why in all the games I'm in, I take notes. Whether I'm running them or whether I'm playing in them, I take notes because I care about the story. I care about the time that the DM is taking to tell me things because I don't know, maybe if the guy running the game thinks it's important for me to know, maybe I should remember that he told me. And thus that shapes everything that I should do. Oh man, let me just go back to this list here. All right, just the basics of what's going on here. Okay, so we just covered know the mission and know the goal. All right, so pet peeve of mine is when people don't remember what the hell they're there for. And so if you don't know what you're there for, you aren't going to identify the objectives you need to meet to get there. You're just going to wander around screwing off. And if you're playing a game that's based on just random charts and everything that you do is just random encounter after random encounter, that's fine. And I've had plenty of games where that is the objective, that is the play style being undertaken, and they're great. But if you have an actual module that you're trying to get through and you don't pay attention or engage with the material, you're not going to have a good time. Make and follow a plan. Oh my God. The amount of players I've seen that just go into a dungeon or go into a scenario, no idea what they're doing, and just go stimulus response, interacting with everything that hits them with no plan of their own on how to handle any of it or how to deal with their challenges. Buddy, that's just torture for a DM, because you have this adventure that you've invested in, you've put thought into it, you've taken time to prepare it, to run it for people, and then they just get slaughtered one right after another because they didn't take their player characters' lives seriously or the level of threat that could be there, which is why the people that sent you needed adventurers to go deal with the dangers, because it's dangerous and that players take no precautions at all. Maintain the tempo. Keep moving. Keep at it. Well, that is important. Operate as a unit. Oh my God. The number of people who ignore the other folks at the table. This is particularly bad in 5e, where every individual character, given enough XP, which usually doesn't take a whole lot, can be a self-sufficient unit, being able to fight, cast spells, heal themselves, and so on. It's an atrocity in 5e. Nobody needs anybody else, and that reinforces the play style of a lot of 5e players of single-player video game characters that just happen to be in a group. Whereas in previous editions, each character type was far more limited what they could do, so you had to cross-balance between each other. And even if you're running a group that's all the same class, you really need to think things through to account for the capabilities that you lack. And that can lead to some very creative gaming, because you have to think through, how would my character do this? But if you don't have any concern about your character's life, their well-being, or their survival, what incentive do you have to plan to keep them alive? In 5e, with the resource management, just complete waste of time. That's the core rules. And I bet 5th edition's the same way. I mean, I don't know that anything got better in 5th edition. You can just resource grind your way through every challenge like a chainsaw going through a felled tree, because give you a short rest, you can get almost all of that back. And with a long rest, you can recover detached limbs. So the threat that comes with not having enough of the things that you need is gone. But yes, players thinking through how they're going to work together to achieve an objective, that's so important. Use your sense and your character senses. And this is important right here, because the Dungeon Master's job is to tell you the basic situation that you're presented with. It is your job as a player to interact with that environment, to ask questions about it, to peel the layers of the onion to find out what's beneath it. So just because a DM tells you this is what you see, doesn't mean that that's all there is to know. It is incumbent on you, the player, the person who's supposed to be playing the game, to engage with the game, to actually play the thing. Now, there's a scenario I've been playtesting recently where the players get hired to do a job to find a particular item, and the job giver, he's not very bright. And he tells the players, I need you to find this painting. And the players go, okay, we'll find the painting. All right, here's what it pays. Now you got 2 days to go and get it and bring it back, or else you're all going to die. And every time, it's been hours later or sessions later, that one of the players realizes they never got told the description of the painting. They don't even have the name of the painting they're looking for. And I put that in there intentionally as a jab, and to show them that they're not dealing with the brightest people possible. But the fact that a player would leave a negotiating table where they accept a job without thinking, okay, do I know what I'm looking for? That's bad. That is not skillful play. That's that stimulus response crap I was talking about. They just assume that they're going to bop on by and get through every scenario and every challenge just by bumping into it, rolling some dice, and moving on, without having to engage their noodle at all. Those folks aren't getting good. Record, refer, and remember. Already addressed that one. Scout the enemy. My God. The number of TPKs I've had in Dungeons & Dragons games because folks haven't scouted where they're going and possibly wasting their characters' lives, it's more than one hand that I can count it on. And that's a fundamental of military tactics, is to scout out the location you're going and the enemy that you're going to be opposing. In Call of Cthulhu and other games like that, where open conflict isn't necessarily your go-to, going to the library, researching the opponent, All these things are important. Gathering information to use, that may be the only way you can succeed at the end of the mission. But if you just bop on by, bumping into different things, but you wind up at the end and you have none of the clues to help you achieve the goal, well, you failed at the game. And that topic of failure, I think a lot of people assume that in role-playing games, the DM is supposed to hand-hold their players every step of the way and spoon-feed them every little detail to make sure that they can successfully complete the scenario. I disagree entirely. When you're playing cards with people, do your opponents tell you what you need to do to beat them in each hand? No, they don't. They don't want to lose. And that's a principle of game design, is you design a game to challenge people to act in a certain way, and if they fail to do that, they fail the mission. And I know the idea that you can fail a mission is apparently new to people, because I've seen a lot of people act like there's no way they can fail, and so they don't need to put any thought into it. Whereas you do. I mean, like at work, I do a lot of presentations, and I rehearse those presentations before I give them, something that the military taught me to do. Rehearse what you're doing before you have to go live and do it, so you can catch those easy mistakes ahead of time, and so be more successful when you get on target. And if you can't be bothered to think through the thing at all, you're gonna fail, and you deserve to. Success is not guaranteed to anybody in any way. Be consistent, evade and avoid. This tacks back to the 5th edition mindset of just resource grind your way through every challenge you come across. In games where you have more limited resource pools to draw from, you have to think things through, and so you have to make the decision of what you're going to waste those resources on or not. What's worth it to you to do that or not? And maybe you're impulsive and throw a fireball at every goblin you meet. Well, then you're going to be out of fireballs when you come to the hundreds of goblins that you encounter later down the line when you really could have used that fireball. And that is a learning opportunity. Say you run out of resources and you get to a fight that you know you can't handle. This is a good time to run away, because running away is usually a good option. Why? Because if you succeed, you're gonna live, and you can't win if you're dead. And don't be afraid to improvise. The amount of times that I've surprised my DMs with out-of-the-box thinking has been satisfying to me and to them, because they like to be entertained too. And using a wand of pass wall to enable a terrorist campaign against the steading of the Hill Giant Chief is one way a 3rd level magic user can survive G1. Hit and run tactics, baby. They're your friend. I could go on and on about this chapter, but I want to hear what your thoughts are in the comments below. Let me know. What do you think about the use of tactics in your games? And I don't want this video to be hours long, so I'm not going to take the time to touch on his modules design critiques, which are also incredibly valuable. This is good stuff coming from the guy who wrote some of the best modules ever made. He was not only the creator of the game, but it's safe to argue he was probably the greatest module designer too. He's a good person to learn from. So that's what I got for now, my dear friends. I hope you enjoy it. I look forward to hearing your thoughts. And till next time, I wish you nothing but the best.